Time for another scrap block. Hello everyone, I thought I would go over on how to make the card trick block the easy way using some of my scraps. So let's get started. For my background fabrics, I cut 2 squares at 7-inch square. We are going to be cutting those on the diagonal later. And then I also have 4 squares measuring 2.5-inch square each. And then we need 4 different colors of fabric, and I have 2.5-inch squares, one from each color, and then 2.5 by 4.5-inch rectangles, one from each color as well. I will have all of these measurements in the description box below, so you don't have to rewind and keep watching if you just want the measurements. So to start this block off, we need to make a little four-patch using our 2.5-inch squares from our colors. And here you can just kind of decide how you want to lay it out, where you want each color. I'm using scrap fabrics. I've seen a lot of people just use solid colors and it looks really nice. But once you have figured out your layout and how you want it to look, we're just going to start sewing them together. But again, I'm just kind of fiddling around till I get the one that I like. And I think I like this version. So to start, we're just going to take the top 2 squares and lay those right sides together and do the same thing with the bottom 2 squares. And then we are going to go and sew them with a 1/4-inch seam. This block was traditionally made with half square triangles, and I find like this method is much easier, especially if you're a beginner quilter. If you just Google card trick block quilt, you will find so many beautiful quilts out there with different color variations. So definitely look into that. So now that I'm ready to move on to the next step, I'm not going to bother going to the iron. I'm just going to finger press. And here I'm going to make sure that I am pressing my seams in opposite directions, and just to make sure that I can nest my seams and get my points to line up nicer. And it will also help the block lay a lot flatter. And I will put a pin in here just that way when I start sewing, I don't have to worry about that point there shifting and it not lining up properly. And then I'm just going to sew this with a 1/4-inch seam, and then I will go and press the whole block. So this is what it looks like now. So we are ready to move on to the next step. So now we need to pick 2 colors. Doesn't matter which ones. You can just pick whichever ones you want. And just make sure you're not putting it in the wrong side. We need to match those colors up with those squares. So I'm going to be putting my orange piece there, making sure, and then I'm going to be taking a piece from the opposite side and putting it there, if that makes sense. We just need to lay them out like this, and then lay these right sides together, and then we're going to go and sew these with a 1/4-inch seam as well. And then once that is done, I did take this to the ironing board and I did give it a good press. And for these, I am pressing my seams away from the center. We want to make sure that we do this here, because for the next step, we will be pressing towards the center. This is again just so that our seams will nest properly and we can get a nice flat block. So now we need to take our remaining 2 pieces, but we need to make sure that we're putting them on the right sides. But before we can add those, we need to take our background 2.5-inch squares, and we're going to be sewing those to either side of our strips. So this is how it's going to lay out, but we just take one 2.5-inch background square and lay it right sides together with our 2.5 by 4.5-inch strip, and just one on each end, and we're going to sew those with a 1/4-inch seam and take them to the ironing board. And these I have pressed towards the center. This is just to ensure, again, so that I can nest my seams. We want a nice flat block, at least I always do. It makes the quilting process a whole lot easier. So now we just need to make sure that we have the right color at the right spot, and we're going to lay it right sides together. Again, nesting our seams, and sorry, I got a little out of frame there. And I'm just going to be popping a couple of pins in. Normally I would be using my clips here, but I think my kids hid them on me because I cannot find them. So I'm going to have to get them to find my clips. I'm just going to place 2 pins. This is just so that I can get my seams to match up nicely and I can have nice points and it's not looking all wonky when it's done. But this is essentially done here. This is our card trick block, and you could just add a border, but I would prefer this to be on point, and that is why I have cut these 2 squares at 7-inch. And I'm going to just lay these together, making sure that everything's matched nice and neat. That way I can cut both of them at the same time, and we need to cut this on the diagonal. So I'm just going to be taking my ruler and then very carefully lining everything up and using my rotary blade and cutting that. And if you saw one of my previous videos, I put that titanium blade in my cutter, and that was eons ago, and it's still going good. So yeah, I will definitely be spending the money on those titanium blades. I will leave a link to those in the description box below. So now we're going to be adding our triangles on here, and as you can see, they are hanging over the edge, but that's okay. That's all going to get trimmed up later. But one way I like to add these on here is I will just fold my triangle in half, and I will just give it a good press and kind of scrape it with my fingernail or my thumbnail, just to make sure that I have a nice crease in there, and then that will be my center point. You could use a pen or a pin to mark it, but I just prefer to crease it. And then I will take my block and fold it in half as well, and again using my nail, just pushing down nice and hard so that I have a crease in there to mark my center point. And this is not permanent. I will give the block a good press once I'm done, and that's all going to get pressed away. So I'm just going to be matching up my two creases there and then lining up my edge, and then I will be using my pins just to hold everything in place so it doesn't shift around on me. I really wish I knew where my clips were, but I will find them yet. And I will be pinning two sides at once. That way I can just go to the sewing machine and I don't have to get up and move back and forth too much because, well, I don't want to. So again, we will just be sewing with a 1/4 inch seam. And this is a bias seam here now because we cut it on the diagonal. So just make sure that you're not tugging or pulling on that triangle piece because it will stretch and distort a bit if you keep doing that. So now we are ready to do the last two sides, and it's the same method. Just fold everything in half and give it a crease, and then just match everything up and pin it and then go sew it. And if you have found this video helpful or you like these kind of videos, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. But I have my block all sewn up here now, and I gave it a good press, and now I'm just going to square it up and trim it up. My block ended up being 12-inch square, which means once I have sewn it into my quilt, it will finish at 11.5. So those are the measurements there, and as you can see, I have a little helper in there today. But I really hope you enjoyed this video. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for stopping by, and until next time.